Ladies and gentlemen, you're a noisy bunch in here. If I could ask everybody to take their seats, please. This is your last chance to make sure your phone is now switched off or you have placed it on airplane mode whilst you're here inside our chapel. And you're in for a little treat to start our service today. The beautiful Newcastle People's Chorus are singing Island in the River. Thank you, everyone. What a wonderful way to open a service for a wonderful woman. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this service that honours an extraordinary life. 94 amazing years in the life of the very much loved, the completely irreplaceable, and the one of a kind, Vera Francis Deacon. Vera, to many of you, or if you are the luckiest young person around, Nan, to her grandson Ben. I wanted to thank you all for coming today to join Vera's family. She would be thrilled that so many people she loved, admired, respected and valued, all here in one room. You are all the people she loved, and I know she would not want to cause you any sadness or any sorrow. So we hope through today's service to smile and remember an extraordinary life. As the beautiful choir was singing, I was sitting over here next to Vera's sister, and she made the loveliest comment. She said, "I wish Vera was here. She'd love this." And she's right. But what we are going to try to do is smile. There are quite a few people, so settle in, who want to stand up here and sing her praises. Everyone has played a different part in her life, and everybody's memories are unique. Of course, we can't begin to understand how busy a day our Lord Mayor has on some occasions, so I think she's running a little late today. Oh, she snuck in and has hidden up in the back seat. I was looking down here, I was keeping an eye out for you, but no. She's one of those back seat people, that come in and want to sit as far back as they can because these are the scary seats down the front. So I'd like to invite our Lord Mayor up to say a few words. Thanks, Nuatali.
Thank you, Caroline. Good afternoon. Let me begin by acknowledging that we are meeting today on the traditional country of the Awabakal and Worimi peoples. The City of Newcastle recognises their cultural beliefs, heritage and continuing relationship with the land. I pay my sincere respects to elders past, present and emerging. I have just been with several elder women from the Awabakal Nation and many different nations around this country today on Mabo Day and the last day of Reconciliation Week. And they wanted to pass on their thanks, their memories, and the absolute joy that Vera brought to their lives for many, many decades. She was a trailblazer in so many ways that we all know, but for those women, there was no Awabakal, there was no Aboriginal co-op, and Vera was one of the people here in Newcastle that helped start that movement. I have literally just left them, and they are filled with great sadness, but also great joy that they got to know Vera, just like all of us. The river is your mother. It's your music, it's your inspiration. You have a bond, it's a mysterious bond. The river is in my blood. That's what our free woman of the City of Newcastle, Vera Deacon OAM, recently said about her beloved Hunter River. And that's where I first met her, on the river on Ash Island, planting trees together not too far away from Dempsey and Mosquito Islands, where we all know that Vera was raised. Like most people she met, most people in this room, I too was totally captivated by Vera. She was so graceful, so intelligent, so wise, so generous with her time and immense wisdom, and just genuinely kind. Vera spent more than 2 decades planting 250,000 native species on Ash Island to protect the island and the precious Hunter River. Vera's father, Norman Pember, always told her, keep an eye on the river, and she did. and he would be so proud of the legacy that she has left. What an enormous legacy it is. Through the Vera Deacon Regional History Fund, her passion will live on and ensure that future generations of Novocastrians will be able to access the records, the accounts of all those people that have come before them. I know the special relationship she formed with Johnny DeGravio. Through their shared love of local history, heritage and conservation, and I know that was cherished so much by Vera. In 2019, I was so proud to join with many of you to award Vera the city's highest honour, a Free Woman of the City of Newcastle. We did so in recognition of her contribution to our heritage, conservation and local history. And the accolades continue to come, with Vera receiving an honorary doctorate from the University of Newcastle, a Medal of the Order of Australia. She always said she wished we wouldn't always make this amount of fuss about her. It was the people around her that deserved to be recognised. And that's just how she was. She knew more than anyone the importance of community, the importance of acting as a collective to stick up for what's right. And we all know she deserved every bit of recognition that she has got, and then some. On behalf of all the citizens of Newcastle, I pay tribute to our free woman of the city, Vera Deacon OAM, an absolute trailblazer for women, a pillar of Newcastle's progressive social and political movements, always on the right side of history in the fight for equality and fairness for all by decades. Whether it be for women's rights, the protection of local heritage, environmental sustainability, and attaining justice for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples of our community, Vera was an unwavering champion of the working class, and she 100% made Newcastle a more egalitarian place to be. She was gentle and considered in all that she did. She used her immense intellect and ability to organise, to join people together, to fight for the oppressed, always. Vera's passion for our local Novocastrian history and our rich heritage was infectious, and I remain truly inspired by her unwavering progressive values and her ability to help others see the importance of weaving all the stories of our history and past into the fabric of our modern life. And that will continue as it does today and into the future. Vera will forever be a part of our city's magical story. May she rest in peace. Thank you.
Thank you to our Lord Mayor. Many of you would know that Vera grew up very close to here, and in fact where we are sitting now on this hill is where she spent her childhood, running around, and I think that is a nice and fitting end. I'd now like to invite from the University of Newcastle her very dear friend, Johnny DeGravio.
How is everyone? You good? Okay. I'm a bit nervous, and I don't ever write anything down. I wrote half of things down, then I started to dot points, so it could be a bit patchy, but yes, Wonderful, wonderful woman. Just want to thank the family for inviting me to say a few words on behalf of the university. We're very, very honoured to celebrate her services in preserving, digitising and making accessible the living histories of Newcastle and the Hunter regional communities. She's helped us to do this over 20 years of benefaction. So she started donating to us in 2001. And they were just small amounts, but it was just to do this or to do that. And we just started a relationship. But I first met Vera in 1996 when she used to visit to do research at the University Archives. She used to travel up from Sydney and she was always very glamorous. She used to arrive in these wonderful white, or beautiful dresses with this gigantic big hat. It was like a movie star from... I used to always compare her to Scarlett O'Hara. But I'd never seen Gone with the Wind. And so when I looked it up on Wikipedia, she was nothing like Scarlett O'Hara. You know, when you see those early pictures of her, very sultry, sexy woman from the islands, you know, young, redhead, think more Rita Hayworth, all right? And she used to sail across here. We're almost on the very ground that she used to sail across to Shelley Beach, but it's only under about 12 metres of BHP fill and disgusting slag that basically glued up most of these islands. So when she first came to us and she was looking for Mosquito Island, I said, "Where's Mosquito Island?" And she said, "Oh, it's over there where..." Because I'd only ever heard of Kooragang Island, one big island. But she explained to us that in her time there were lots of islands and BHP filth basically connected all them up into one island called Kooragang Island, which Dr. Glenn Albrecht used to call the Aboriginal term for a place of toxic waste. But anyway, so I found for her later, while rummaging in some archives, All Saints Church, the plan for the church that used to be on Mosquito Island. We were friends for life, and she kept coming up. And then eventually, when her husband died, she moved up here. She joined the book lovers that used to hang out of David McLean's Cooksville shop. And there was a beautiful moment once when we were discussing love, the topic of love, and Emeritus Godfrey Tanner quoted some lines from a Shakespearean sonnet, and Vera then chimed in after him and said that was the very sonnet that her husband Stan courted her with. So they formed a bond, and in came, after Godfrey's death, a bit of money to sort of look after Godfrey's papers. So as these interconnections started, the various things that I was involved with helped her connect to family and friends that she'd thought she'd never connect with. And I think that was the kind of impetus that started the contribution to the university. I think those connections, she wanted to see other people experience those connections as well. And we got to the point where she was just kept giving us money until she out-benefacted the Coal and Allied Mining Company by 2-1, and sort of we went to Bernie Curran Foundation and said, "Look, we need to do something. She's given us more money than coal and mining companies. Pretty good for a Stockton pensioner." And so they set up the Vera Deacon Regional History Fund in her honour, and then we started sort of being able to employ students. One afternoon while eating a kebab or something, I broke a tooth and went to the bus stop, and at the bus stop was an honours student in arts, Peter Gray, who had no shoes. He was $600 in the red and he didn't know what he was going to do. And I said, "Well, look, we just got some money from Vera. Why don't you apply for some of the positions?" And he ended up getting the position. He started accessioning the Copley records, among other things. That we've got scholars Kate and Justin Ellis looking into at the moment, and they're having a wonderful time in those papers. Well, they would have never been found if it wasn't for Vera hiring Peter to go down into the bowels and do this. And Peter eventually saved up and bought some shoes, and then he threw one of the shoes at John Howard live on television during a Q&A. So that, but again, Vera wasn't very, she wasn't nasty or anything. She was very, very lovely. But she would get chuffed out of that, And anyway, he passed away later, and it was just wonderful that at his funeral, he was called an archivist, and she sort of gave him, besides being the naughty boy activist that was taking the coal mining companies to court, he also had another life, accessioning these papers of people like him that had come before him and did similar things. So, look, we're enormously, we sort of miss her. I know that she was really not really wanting to live any further. She'd gotten to the end of it and she was really just fed up with it. I've only had 2 people in my life who have come up to me and said, look, thank you. I've really loved meeting you. I've really loved being apart from you. You know, you're fantastic to be with. And she was one of those people that sort of said that and then passed away really quickly. But anyway, from the time that she started investing with us, this is the list. We've accessioned hundreds of boxes of regional research archives containing many thousands of individual items. We've digitised over 2.5 kilometres of Hunter regional maps and subdivision plans. Many thousands of local photographs and images that have had over 63.9 million hits on Flickr. Digitised hundreds of hours across 1,300 oral history recordings. Digitised and indexed over 5,000 pages of children's homes records for care leavers. Digitised 2 entire series of NBN television programs in the 1970s and 1980s. A history of Ravensworth Homestead, a history of Crowder's House, mapped 5,500 Aboriginal place names across New South Wales, sponsored the creation of a virtual reality 3D Aboriginal Newcastle landscape, a 3D colonial Newcastle in 1825 landscape, a smartphone app, and a store oral history featuring 20 recorded video histories. These are all the things that Vera and her fellow donors have been able to do. She's employed over a dozen students and volunteers to be able to do this work. And it's wonderfully being all brought together at the moment with Glenn and Tony and the stories of our town who are making those beautiful films that are rolling out. So anyway, wonderful woman. I just love her and I'm going to miss her. But there's plenty. We've got 5.5 hours of recordings that we're yet to put on YouTube, so you'll hear her voice forevermore.
Thank you, Johnny. She has far-reaching effect. Next, I'd like to invite her wonderful friend Marilla to come on up and share a few words. Thank you, Marilla.
It is truly an honour to have been asked to stand here today and pay tribute to a woman who has shaped me and shaped many other women in her belief that she stood on the shoulders of all of the women who fought for justice for Indigenous people, for women and for the downtrodden in society. She stood on their shoulders, and when she accepted those honours that she had to be dragged over the line to accept sometimes, she said, okay, I'm accepting it for all of them. And that's what she did. Following on from Johnny, it is most fitting that we're today celebrating the life of Vera Pember Deacon in the heartland of her birth and childhood in the years of the Great Depression. Vera Pember was born just a few kilometres east along Maitland Road, Mayfield, round the corner and into 65 Hanbury Street, and Nurse Whiteman's lying-in home opposite Webb Park. We need a plaque on that. The Pember family life itself began in a very humble shack in Oakley's Park off Woodstock Street, but soon moved out to Dempsey Island after Norman, her father, was very badly burnt on the BHP coke ovens. One of many, many men that she would write about in her career later as a realist writer for Tribune and for many collections of short stories that would take that message past the cynicism of the Sydney literati who thought Newcastle was a scungy place and they didn't want to know about it. They caused strikes and problems. But once they read the stories that she wrote and researched heavily, she was an excellent researcher, they saw what she was bringing to the world and what Newcastle had brought to the world and what the working class of Newcastle had done for the world during the Second World War. And that's a tradition that Johnny and Co are documenting beautifully in our archives at the university. In 1933, when they were on the island in the first instance, Vera's little brother died of meningitis, and his father moved back from the island. From 34 to 39 on the mainland, they made a home in the Mayfield West unemployed camp, cobbling together from sugar bags and building offcuts, a very humble house that was a heartland of love and training for the values that the Pemba parents passed on to their glorious daughter. She wrote out of that a short story called Making Do and Lasting Out. And it was about the period that about that period. And her short story now has become quite an iconic piece of social realist writing. It was first published in a collection called Depression Down Under in 1977, and it's been reprinted and travelled around the country and the world. It's in Taiwan at the moment. The family finally settled down on Mosquito Island, or Mosquito Island, and it was the Pemba family home from 1939 to 1951. It was a lovely old settler's house that you can see the photos of it on the website of the University Archive. And it was surrounded by trees, by veggie gardens, and by the river. It all became grist for the mill when, after she married Stan Deacon, and that was after the Second World War, and went to Sydney, she joined the Australian Book Society. It was a cooperative in 1952. Cooperative was in her blood from her parents' training. And she was on the board of that in 1956 when a young woman walked in called Dorothy Hewitt with a novel called Bobbin' Up. And she then went on to help publish that book and joined with Dorothy in the fledgling realist writers group with people like Mona Brand, our first overseas playwright, Len Fox, Frank Hardy, and of course Dorothy. They had they shared a friendship that grew into their life stories. And in fact, the song that the choir sang coming in is the poem that Dorothy wrote out of the oral history that Vera Pemba Deacon gave her while they had that friendship together. They even shared the same colour typewriter. They had a red Remington. And their close friendship over the years led to Vera putting a lot of help into getting Dorothy into a stable and happy life. And that's another story. It's a long story, but it's a very touching one, and it's a story of great friendship. So the island in the river, which was a bitter river and it ran, was a woman's story. And we need to remember that too. It was Vera Deacon's specific woman's story. When she later came back home and the closing of the BHP was about to happen, she entered the competition that the BHP were running called Rivers of Steel. Her best friend Margaret Harvey also entered that competition, and she came up with a beautiful poem which we hope is going to see the light of day later in the year. But today I want to read you just a little of Vera's words from River Song by Colquhoun, which was the name that the Aboriginal people gave to the Hunter River. She's in the wartime period. Wartime brought identity cards to anyone over 14 and watchmen to the Black Wharf. That's just outside of Lysarts, the old fabrication plant where my father worked in the Second World War manufacturing the Owen gun. And Vera, of course, rode to that wharf and got on her bicycle and went to tech, or went to her other activities when she joined the party, and went to the office where she met Stan Deacon at the top of town. Wartime brought identity cards. One watchman, tall, ageing, lean and tanned, watched as we helped unload the milk crates from the launches, the Alice Mary and the Victory. She went on the milk run to get from the island onto the mainland to bicycle, to school, and then to tech, and then, of course, to work. "What's your name?" we chorused. His laughed and his blue eyes were rayed by deep crinkles. "George Aloysius Montgomery Max." Astonishment gaped our mouths. But he said, "You can call me Aloysius." We visioned and spelt this strange name as Allah Wish Us. Always we spoke in capital letters as our tone. His past held hints of mystery, hints of World War One, outback days in Queensland. Nothing of family. We all felt Aloysius guarded not only all the steelworks and its pump house on the Black Wharf, but us too, as we straggled along to school. Squabbles, gravel rashes, wheezy chests. Aloysius soothed all with sweets and sips of water, laughing welcomes and tall stories. 6 days a week, he watched a girl who rode to work, singing away the 2 miles of Mosquito Creek and river, to hail her as she moored her little green boat at the Black Wharf. Days of mirrored calm let her dream and drift, while fogs, mists, and veiled the river and hushed the grind and screech of the works, the cries of soaring birds. Storms and gales whipped racing tides against the wind and her boat. Once, losing an oar in a shrieking southeasterly gale, she bailed water and with scooping hands pulled the little boat to the shore by the gasometers. 6 working men waded out to carry the boat and her, Vera, to the shore. Seeing her bleeding feet torn when pushing the boat from beneath the island wharf, they whisked her protesting to the works first aid station. When an August westerly hurled the incoming tide, the girl slipped on the rocks, jarred her wrist and unwisely rode into the wide South Channel. Far away on Black Wharf, Aloysius watched again as the little boat trembled, rose, dipped and rose again as the girl rose in long contest. At last, the bow nudged the wharf slipway. He seized the rope, he helped the girl. "Didn't think you were going to make it, girlie." Swiftly she hid her tears and swollen wrist against his coat. I did, Aloysius.
Thank you, Marilla. Now, if Malcolm is okay to say a few words, I'll bring over a microphone for him.
What a huge crowd. It is a huge crowd. They're all here to hear me. My name's Malcolm, and I'm Vera's dear friend for nearly 30 years. I must apologise that I have Parkinson's, and it doesn't encourage me to great feats of oratory. But I'll try. I first met Vera when I was 6, and I fell in love with her then, as little boys do. And she kissed me on the forehead. Vera made friends without trying, but I suspect that she did try. But then, I recall one time when we caught the ferry across from Stockton to Newcastle, and then a bus down to Spotlight. When she got on the bus, she said to the driver, "Hello, driver, how's the day been?" From that small start, developed an interaction between the other passengers on the bus. By the time the bus got to Spotlight, they were all talking together. She was known as the Flower Lady in DY, where she worked at the post office. And I believe did a wonderful job of reconciling a couple of factions that had split the workforce at DY Post Office. And she got them all together to talk it over, and things were right from then on. One of the things that she used to do was to bring along flowers, and not only just put them in the pots that were on the counter, but plants that were still in their pots full of soil. And these were given away to customers. And this woman grabbed hold of Vera and said, "You're the flower lady, aren't you? I've still got that plant that you gave me 3 years ago." She didn't do it for reward. She was just herself, highly intelligent, very loving. She respected all human beings, including 6-year-old boys.
Running along the foreshore.
I could go on for hours, but Daria won't let me. Like a mum. On that big screen up there, there's going to be a montage before too long, and in it there are scenes from, I presume, from Vera's life. There's one photograph that I want you to take note of, and it's me chasing Vera down the street. It was the foreshore, actually. And I could have caught her. Now, I think you'll see what I see every time I look at that, her joy in living and her happiness of me to run along behind her. And who cares whether we look... I'm starting to fade. Thank you all for coming.
Wonderfully done. We're going to give you a little break from all the talking and let you see Vera. These are some favourite photographs captured over the past 94 years. This is just a tiny glimpse into an extraordinary life. Do you know what I noticed from the early photographs to the very last ones? There may have been the odd grey hair, there may have been a few extra wrinkles, but the smile stayed exactly the same. I'd now like to ask her long-time friend Rod Noble to come on up and share a few words. Thank you, Rod.
Thank you. What a wonderful montage. Actually, I wasn't going to raise this right here, but I have a photograph that of Vera parading down Hunter Street in 1945 at the top of a float, surrounded by many soldiers celebrating the victory in the Second World War, at least in the European theatre. May Day 1945. People want to have a look at it later. I'm happy to share that. I received a phone call not that long ago, 6 months or maybe a bit longer ago, from Vera. Very not the sort of phone call I really wanted to receive, but it was to say, Rod, would you say something at my funeral? Would you do a eulogy at my funeral? And I was just stunned by that, because I thought at that stage that she was Vera was going to be there forever. But sadly, that wasn't the case. And a week later, I knew it was very serious, because a week later she rang me again and asked me to make sure that I was going to say something. I didn't have to ask her what she wanted me to say. I knew instinctively. My condolences to Daria and Deborah and Malcolm, and to all of Vera's family. When I first met Vera nearly 3 decades ago, she'd already been immersed in a life with so many dimensions, including at least 40 years of political activity. Before I met her, I'd certainly heard about her. The thing that struck me at our first meeting was that she was a woman with a deep well of wisdom and humanity, and a broad understanding of what was going on in the world. And this realisation was very quick to come. After the first few sentences, you just knew she was someone to learn from. She was happy to talk about a single issue, but it was always clear that she was not a single issue person. She was about people together, collectively changing the world for the better. Not just to survive, but to enjoy life. And she knew there was a way to do it. She knew there were certain forces in the way blocking it. She knew what had to be done, and she knew the enemy, and she studied them both very carefully. She possessed a well-integrated political philosophy, philosophical and political philosophy that enabled her to analyse world events very quickly, and she used that to prioritise action on the ground. She agreed that if you don't know where you've been, how do you know where you're going? It's no accident that Vera supported regional history and the environment and many other things, and it stemmed from her political perspective and concern for the earth on which we live. A little bit more about her political life. Her politics sprung, no doubt, from her life experience during the Depression, World War II, and from all those people she met and joined in struggle. She was secretary of the TAFE Students' Union while still a teenager. It wasn't long before she joined the Communist Party, the CPA. She was proud of her membership and said that it was there that she met some of the best people you could ever hope to meet. She stayed in the CPA until 1991, when it dissolved into the Search Foundation, which she then joined. In 1997, not long after she arrived back in Newcastle from Sydney, she joined the Progressive Labor Party, and she was very active in the Hunter Broad Left, from which she received an award in 2014. So, left-wing politics, it's no surprise to most people here, was central to her life. In Vera's view, there is an historical necessity for socialism. She said that to me a number of times. Because of her politics, Vera was harassed by our secret police, otherwise known as ACO. We know now that early in her CPA membership, an agent was sometimes sitting outside her home at night. And we know that because they were able to report to their paymasters the crime that Mrs. Vera Deacon had been up late at night typing. Can you believe that? Like, what do they get paid for, seriously? Her extensive ASIO files show that she was spied on over many years. A second observation. Vera was an extremely talented writer and speaker. Throughout the 1950s and 60s in Sydney, Vera was very active, speaking in the Domain, writing numerous articles for the Tribune newspaper. She joined the Realist Writers in 1954, won a Mary Gilmore Literary Medal for writing in 1957. She became National Secretary of the Realist Writers in 1960. She also became a committee member of the Australasian Book Society, which had been formed in 1952. And she also visited Newcastle and helped set up a branch of the Realist Writers up here in Newcastle with Bruce Toms, who's sitting over there, who's now 96 years old. A third observation. Vera loved singing and songs. And this aspect of Vera's life, her love of music in particular, related to the Newcastle People's Chorus, who you heard sing a little bit earlier. She first heard the song Weevils in the Flower, which is surprising because her friend Dorothy Hewitt wrote it, but as a poem, not as a song, and it was put to music later. And Vera first heard that sung by the People's Chorus in Sydney in 1995. She loved it, as the song was about her life on the islands and the Hunter River, and as we know, written by Dorothy Hewitt. Vera became an ardent follower of the People's Chorus and attended many of the chorus parties, where over many years those present were privileged to hear her stories and, of course, her up-to-date political analysis. We were all lucky to have among us such a person as Vera, as a political activist, an advocate for those not so well off and for those in need of support. She was an example to us all. I'm sure she would say to us now, well, now it's for you to carry on. We'll all miss her so very much, but then so much of Vera is still with us as we go about our daily struggles and work for a better world. We miss you, Vera.
Thank you, Rod. Vera made friends with whoever she met. She made a connection with lots of people and had friends from all walks of life. You can see that coming through everybody's tributes today. I'd like to now invite her good friend Scott Bevan to come on up and share a few words. Thanks, Scott.
Afternoon. How beautiful it is to see so many here to honour and celebrate the life of Vera Deacon. Mind you, if Vera herself were here, she would chide us and she would tell us to stop making such a fuss over her, that she doesn't deserve this recognition. As she once said to me, she didn't want to be big noted. That was Vera, wasn't it? Wonderful at giving praise, less keen about accepting it. Now, as we all know, in this world we try to strike a balance between giving and taking in our lives, and most of us do okay at it, but not Vera. I know at a memorial service you're not meant to talk about someone's failings. However, it has to be said, Vera failed at striking that balance between give and take. She utterly, willfully, triumphantly failed at that. Because in the ledger of life, Vera's scales tipped overwhelmingly, beautifully, to giving. Vera Deacon was an extraordinary giver. As we've heard today, she gave to the university to further the study and our understanding of local history. She gave so much time, so much effort to restoring and regenerating her beloved Hunter River estuary with her work on the Kooragang Wetland Rehabilitation Project. She gave to so many cultural initiatives, from Stockton's Historical Society to the city's Writers' Festival. She gave so much to the issues of social justice, to make the world a fairer, kinder, better place, partly because of her own upbringing in Depression-era Newcastle, but ultimately because it's what she believed in. And Vera, as we heard, joined the Communist Party of Australia, giving time and her organisational skills, and in the process, she also gave employment opportunities to officers in ASIO. As Rod mentioned, she was both amazed and bemused when many years later she accessed her ASIO file and saw that wonderful quote about Mrs. Deacon typing at night. But what Vera was doing was not typing up some manifesto for a revolution. Mrs. Deacon was typing up the minutes for her daughter's school's P&C. So really it wasn't a case of the spy who came in from the cold, it was the volunteer who came in from the kitchen. Vera didn't believe in sharing just some political thought or a philosophical precept, an ideological concept. She acted on it. She lived it. Hers was a life of sharing. It was a life to be shared. For above all, she gave to others. She shared everything she had, from her time and her wisdom to her money and her knowledge. Indeed, she shared her knowledge with me when I was writing my book, The Hunter, and then filming the documentary for the ABC on the river. Vera shared her stories and her memories of the river that she grew up by, that inspired her, nurtured her, helped put words in her mouth and onto the page. That river that sang to her as she rode across it. And as I mentioned in 2019, when she was made a free woman of the city, Vera has been very much like the river itself. She has flowed almost imperceptibly, but so profoundly and deeply through our lives and through the life of this city. And like the river, she's helped shape the character of Newcastle to help us better understand who we are and where we live, where we're from, and to cherish more deeply our home. Vera, as we heard, referred to the river as a mother. But in turn, Vera was a mother to this city, benevolent and kind, nurturing and giving, just like the Hunter River, really. But unlike the river, the only flood that Vera produced were torrents of love and of praise and kindness. A river is an often used metaphor for life itself, which makes sense. Rivers flow and meander, they carry hopes and hazards, they provide and they take away. Rivers have a beginning and they have an end. But do they end? The Hunter may end just down from here in the harbour, but its waters, its influence flow on, out to sea. And so it is with Vera. In one sense, this daughter of the Hunter River has left us. She flows on. But all that she carried, all that she stood for, all that she believed in, all that she gave also flows on. It flows on in us, those fortunate enough to have known her, learnt from her, loved her, and to be loved by her. Which means the life of Vera Deacon continues to flow on in all of us in one way or another, and through the life of this city and beyond. And decency flowed from one generation to the next with Vera and her family, the Pembers. As Vera used to say, she tried to live by her father's final words to her: don't be greedy, do good, and keep an eye on the river. So perhaps those words can flow on into our lives as a guide, so that we may follow the example and honour the memory of that extraordinary, beautiful giver of joy, of love and of life, Vera Deacon. Farewell, Vera, and thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Vera has been many things to many people, but at the heart of her, she was a mum. And I would like to invite her daughter, Daria, to come on up and say a few words.
Just stand one on each side of me. Well, I think we can see that Mum was good at making friends from all walks of life. In my entire life, I've only heard her really say something nasty about two people, Robert Menzies and John Howard. How fortunate were we to have that beautiful choir start proceedings today with that poem that Dorothy wrote all those years ago. I remember Dorothy when we were children, and it's just so lovely that Rod was able to organise the choir today. Thank you very much. And heartfelt thanks to Nuatali, Johnny, Scott, Marilla and Rod for their beautiful words, and most especially to Malcolm. When I first met Malcolm, he told me that he'd laid eyes on Mum when he was a little boy. He said, it only took me 50 years to get her. And I thought that was a lovely story. And that photograph of Mum on the back of the Mayday truck with that outfit on, I think that might have been when he first spied her. We're really lucky today to have three of Vera's siblings with us: Auntie Audrey, Auntie Marcia and Auntie Philly. Unfortunately, their two brothers left us a long time ago, and our darling Margaret, the youngest of all of them, left us a few years ago. So there's just the three girls left to tell the stories of the island. And they would all remember when this here was just grassy banks of the river, and they could run down to the river and play on it. And we heard every story about the island over the years from all of them. And I think we're just fortunate in a strange way that Pettigrews is here now, and Mum, as they said before, she started here and she's ending here. She would have been happy with the symmetry of that. I think I said when Mum was given the free woman of the city that she was one of the greatest generation this country's known, a generation that sacrificed a lot for their country. But as Rod said, they learned about hardship, and I think that formed Mum's view of life. When we were kids, she was always the one that helped neighbours with problems. As they were saying before, made friends with people at the post office, and was always generous with her time and her care for other people. I don't think there's really anybody I can think of who met her over the years who didn't like her. She looked them in the eye, she smiled at them, and she made them feel like she really cared about them. I know when we were kids, she was probably the most fun mother in the district, because she'd get all the kids around her and take us on these long bush walks and show us the Aboriginal carvings. She'd have a Christmas party for all the kids in the street every Christmas Eve. And I didn't find out till I was probably old enough to understand that the girl's brother drowned on Christmas Eve, and Mum's way of coping with that grief that never left her was to get all the kids around her and have a party and have fun so that she didn't dwell on it. She was also fantastic in what she taught us. She taught us to sew and cook and, you know, things that we will remember forever, like we do of your mother, our Nan, who taught all of you and who taught Vera, and Vera passed it on. I really want to thank everybody for coming today and sharing this tribute to Vera, and she would ask you to keep going with the fight for all the causes you believe in, keep planting at Kooragang, keep donating to the foundation at the university so Johnny can get more of that stuff digitised, donate your documents too, and fight for all the good causes, but most of all, do what Mum would have done. Be nice to each other, be kind to everyone you meet, and she'll be looking down on you. She used to say, I'll be off in the cosmos somewhere, looking down on you all. As you know, she was an atheist, but she thought we all turned back into some sort of space dust, and she's up there somewhere watching us, and she'll be haunting the river, I suspect. So thank you for coming, and love to you all from Vera. Thank you.
Yes, you can't believe that whatever it is you believe in yourself, whatever your faith is, but no one, I think, could ever imagine that someone as extraordinary, as great, as immense, as influential as Vera could ever be lost forever. She is somewhere watching. We hope you can stay after this service to join her family in the function room. It's really a time to be together because this is also a memory of Vera's life. All of us being together today and remembering an extraordinary woman. So if you don't have to rush off to be somewhere else, I know her family would truly value you staying just a little while longer. It is fitting today that the final word before we wrap up is left to Vera. A little glimpse into her via a video presentation titled The Islanders. This is a few minutes with Vera. Thanks, Jessie.
The river is your mother. It's your music, it's your inspiration. You have a bond, it's a mysterious bond. I'm not a poet, but the river definitely sings to you. It fed us, it transported us. You learn to row a boat. I feel safer on a river than I do on a road with a motor car. Part of the Hunter River, the estuary. There was man-made Walsh Island, Mosquito Island, Dempsey Island, Ash Island. As Dad said to me, now your boat's wood, and if you ever ship water and you capsize, don't leave your boat. Hang on to it, it'll float, and tread water till somebody rescues you. So I didn't feel frightened. We could just run wild. We had a little boat. We could play pirates. And she's a great mother. She believed girls shouldn't be allowed to rip and climb trees. And Dad had a swing for us, and we made tree houses. And we made our own fun. My dog, Flossie, was taken by a shark. A big sleeper came down, and I hammered a fruit box to it, and you'd sit in it and pretend it was a canoe with, and my dog's swimming beside me. So I get out, and just as I get ashore, a shark comes along and takes Flossie. The yelp from the dog and the blood, and the dog disappears. I used to row myself to work from Mosquito Island, out of Mosquito Creek, down into the South Channel, directly opposite the big gas holders that BHP had, those big tall things. Rowed across to that if there was a southerly wind blowing, because you'd be sheltered along the southern bank and get to the Black Wharf at Ingalls Street. It was called the Black Wharf because the Waratah Council at the time, they used to bring down the human dung from the pan system when before it was sewered, and it was carted out and dumped at sea. That's why it was the Black Wharf, because it got black with human four-letter word excreta. Largely, I think we were the islanders, because when I worked at McFadgen's, it got round Newcastle, oh, there's a girl working, she's from the island. They'd come in and look at me. And I said to Mother, what the devil do they think we're looking at? We weren't monkeys. You can't go around with your hair perfect all the time if you row boats and ride bikes to work. But now they have wind machines to harass the model's hair, so I've come into fashion. They had a philosophy, my parents, that you had to share what wealth you had. Well, they had no wealth, but Dad was a wonderful gardener. When we went to Mosquito Island back in 1939, we left the camp. We moved over at the end of the May holidays. Within no time, he dug up this enormous vegetable garden. I don't know how he had the strength, because he was still coughing and recovering from TB. But he did it, and he could grow anything. Yeah. That's one of the reasons they went there, because the soil was so rich. Newcastle's soil was very poor, not good for growing. The men had joined up in the army, and there weren't enough men to grow the vegetables and stuff up at Maitland and all those areas. It was suggested that they stew lucerne and stinging nettles as a substitute green vegetable. Dad hit the roof. We're not eating stinging nettles, we're not eating lucerne, I'll go into mass production. And he sowed beans and peas and lettuce. We knew it was impending. Japan was at our gates. We were warned about that, and they announced Pearl Harbor, and I ran down to tell Dad, who was putting his nets in his boat, and I told him, and I said, what will we do if the Japs get here? And he looked at his grappling hook. He had nothing else. He said, we'll go up river. If they get here, they'll be flat out finding us in the mangroves, because he had all these children and Mother and our dogs and our cat, Tarpot, and 2 ducks, Donald and Diddle, our pet ducks. Had all, that's all we had was a grappling hook with a point on it to defend us with. We were naive, as we often laughed about that, because Japan went through Southeast Asia, jungle and everything, in no time. There was a ring of blackberry bushes. We dug an air raid shelter in the middle of this blackberry patch, thinking if the Japs did come, they'd get tangled up in the blackberries, wouldn't be able to get us. We have to laugh, don't you? How naive we were. It filled up with water. Dad said, bloody useless. He said, never mind, we'll use it as a well to water the gardens. We would have drowned in it. Newcastle was shelled. We woke up this June winter night in 1942 and hear this, and we all go outside with Dad and Mum. It's about 2 o'clock and we hear boom, boom. We all thought with Dad that it was our guns practicing, but there was one puzzling thing. The sky was lit up brilliantly. We could see the steelworks, there's a floating dock there across Rotten Row and down to Newcastle, just like, almost like day. Next day, my father and brother found the parachute. Dad surmised that this is what had lit up the sky that night of the shelling. He's showing it around the pubs, and it was in Stiffy Amos's pub, or the Stag and Hunter. Someone must have rang up, because these officials came and took it from Dad and said, oh, it's part of the war, we have to hand it in, and you might get it back later. Eventually it got over to Mum, and Mum cut it up and made blouses for my sisters out of it. It was silk, you see. Audrey, my sister, she was 6 years younger, she heard a big plop in Mosquito Creek, and she believes that a shell fell in the creek that night. The Japanese knew what they were firing at. They were after the steelworks. They hoped to make a hit on the steelworks, but they didn't. And we see, as we get down towards the point of what was Walsh Island, in the white sand is shining, and it's this unexploded shell. Well, our immediate reaction was, go and tell the soldiers. So we rush back and we see Captain Weaver. They put us in the launch. They took the shell aboard and they took it to there where their guns were, and they got somebody over, and it was deloused, as they called it. I can remember when I was about 5, or 1931, Dad had caught a lot of mullet and he made himself a smokehouse on the riverbank in front of this little tiny house we had. Got the smoke going and he opens the fish up and they're full of tar. He looked across at the works and he said, "They're killing the river." I've never forgotten it. And it's right, they treated the river as a sewer. Mum and Dad left the island when they started the island reclamation scheme. Read the island destruction scheme. They just filled in the estuary, and what have they turned it into, those islands? A coal heap, a great mass of coal. The dust comes across here, people's lungs are full of it. It's in your nose. I wipe it off my furniture. It's industry. My father's last injunction was me when he was dying. I'm sitting beside him at Newcastle Hospital. He said to me, "Now I know you'll live up to it. You won't be greedy and you'll do good, and keep an eye on the river." The river was very precious to us all and to him. So I've tried to live up to those requests. Malcolm, my partner, came in and he said, "Oh, Vera, ABC has announced that they're having a bus tour of work on the Ash Island. You ought to ring up and go." So I did. And that's how I met Peggy Savoba. We used to meet once a month to plant trees and bushland on Ash Island to rehabilitate it. And we used the list of the native plants listed by the Scott sisters, Helena and Harriet.
How do you think your father would have felt about that?
Oh, Dad would have been thrilled. Well, I was a bit embarrassed. I'll tell you why, because we were brought up to try and put back into the community something of what you've taken out. And I've worked with all these people, and as I've said, well, I accept on their behalf because I've worked with hundreds of people and they deserve it much as I do. But why they pick on me, I don't know. And I've said that they should ask you before, and then you can say, "No, I'd rather you didn't put my name up." But they don't do that. They don't do it. I chose to live in Stockton for the sole reason that I can go out my front door and look and I can see the Hunter River. So that the river's in my blood. The river unites the island people. Its tides, its move, the gales, the storms, everything. And the men used to watch us along the steelworks bank, lice us and see us rowing up. Years later, my husband and I are having a meal on a holiday up at Shoal Bay, and this man, he said, "I know who you are. You're the girl who used to row the river. We used to hear you singing, and I used to sing, you know, the White Cliffs of Dover and the Road to Gundagai." Well, it gives you a rhythm. You're rowing to the rhythm of the song as well as the river. In my mind, it says you can do it, you see?
For the past 94 years, our city, the world has been a better place because one Vera Frances Deacon lived here. She was an extraordinary woman. She was always positive. She loved everyone she met, and everyone that she met loved and remembered her because she always left an impression. She always looked you in the eye, and she had beautiful eyes. She has touched more people's lives than she would ever be able to imagine or count. It is only every once in a while that someone extraordinary passes through your life. All of you have been lucky enough to be part of Vera's story. For some of her 94 years, you have walked beside her, and she would say simply, thank you. As we close our memorial service here today, can I ask, as one way to honour Vera and everything she has meant to you, if you are able, would you all please stand? Vera Francis Deacon, in love and respect, we have remembered your life, recalled the person you have been. In this final act, in sorrow but without fear, your character and personality we commit to our memories, your love and your friendship we commit to our hearts. We are all so grateful for the life that Vera has lived and everything that her life meant to those she loved and those who loved her. We now remember her, leave her in peace, and with love and respect, we say thank you.